Perfect. Now, guys, you're all very, very welcome anyway to our last panel discussion tonight. So on Monday, we had Barrister David Hand and we had a lecturer in Peace Studies, Gillian Wiley, both speaking, and we had Bolan Ali Mfako, who also pitched in a lot of very insightful details. Great to see you again here tonight, Mr. Mfako. And then on Wednesday night, then we had Ivana Bacic, we had a member, Amanda Nyoni from Massey, and we had a recipient of Trinity's ASAP scholarship speaking as well about their experiences in direct provision and from the political side of direct provision as well, about what it's like in Ireland, the history of it, and why it's an unsustainable model. And tonight then we'll be talking about going forward, what we can do as individuals and as a community to directly challenge direct provision, to bring it down and to allow to reform to be a much more humane and much more accepting system in our nation. So tonight we have Conal Keane from Trinity Vdp, we have Karen Cowley, and we have Quiva Butterley, is it? Butterley, perfect. And Quiva and Karen are both from the hashtag 400 Welcomes campaign. Just to inform you about that, so there was a massive fire in a camp over in Moira in Lesbos in Greece, and that has left 13,000 people seeking asylum now homeless. And the campaign, the 400 Welcomes, is looking to extend 400 welcomes to asylum seekers over in Greece to welcome them into Ireland as well. And I'll just give you a quick whistle-stop tour of the first two panel discussions, just to give you a brief idea of what was discussed and what were the kind of takeaway facts and figures from those first two discussions. So on Monday night, the 6 things we took away were 79 million people have been displaced worldwide due to climate change and due to civil war. In Ireland, 9 out of 10 refugee applications were rejected in the first instance. Now, this number has now been decreased to 7 out of 10, but it's still a shocking statistic to hold on to. There's a tribunal process in which members and applicants are assessed, and one tribunal member for the judicial appeals process had over 500 asylum applicants and only granted 9 of them. A trauma-informed process does not exist in the international protection system in Ireland, so people coming from very, very difficult backgrounds who have suffered psychologically and who have who have poor mental health because of the situations they've been subjected to, there's no process to actually cater for that in our country. One person was asked in the appeals tribunal why the rapist wanted to rape them, so it kind of shows the lack of empathy in the interview process here in Ireland. And in the UK and Ireland, is a requirement that members of the LGBT plus community have to prove their sexual orientation. So those were kind of six big things we took away from Monday's conversation. And then on Wednesday's talk, we had it was all about direct provision in Ireland and the history of direct provision. Direct provision was first set up as an emergency measure in 1999 to take asylum seekers off the streets. As previous to this, asylum seekers had literally just been left by our government on the street, so set up as an emergency measure to ensure they had somewhere to go. And as an emergency measure, you can now guess that's been about 21 years ago. As an emergency measure, it just hasn't been dealt with or hasn't been reformed since then. Some people have been in direct provision for over 10 years, which is a startling thing to think about. To be stuck in a place that is not fit for human or not fit for purpose, it's not fit for a human to grow up in or to develop in. And there are a large number of children in direct provision centres as well, which is an alarming thing to think about when it comes to the mental health implications and to the psychological implications for people subjected to these awful conditions. Asylum seekers are 5 times more likely to suffer from depression. And as the recipient of the ASAP scholarship said, depression is real because you just don't know what else can go wrong. And the recipient themselves spoke very, very compassionately and very, very honestly about their experiences in direct provision, continued and present, or past and present rather. The weekly wage per person in direct provision centre is €38.80. €38.80 is a shambolic amount of money to give to people because it does not constitute normal living wage. It doesn't allow you to freedom, or it doesn't allow you to liberties to do anything with the money you have. And the ASAP recipient and Amanda Nyoni from Massey both also came out saying that a lot of their money per week actually went on transportation costs, sometimes to actually pick up the money from the General Post Office here in Dublin. Managers will open up the residence mail. So in direct provision centres, your manager actually has the liberty to open up the post that you received. And again, a direct quote that came from the recipient of the ASAP scholarship from the manager approached them and said, "Hi, I have received your mail and I know what's in it." So a huge invasion of personal privacy is also evident in direct provision centres. And a startling thing as well, as many startling facts were being dealt with here tonight, is that private operators have received over 1.1 billion euro from the state in funding to run direct provision centres. Because direct provision centres, because they're not run by the state and they're not monitored by the state, there's about 7 monitored by the state, around of a total of 47, with three that are deemed capable or appropriate for human living in. Because the other 40 of them are run by private sectors, it means that they're run for profit, which again is a horrible thing to think about when you're talking about a location that's set up to welcome or to house people in, that they're actually for profit. So tonight, as I said, we have Conal Keane from Trinity Vdp, and then we have Karen and we have Quiva as well, who will all be discussing direct provision, the 400 welcomes campaign going forward, what we can do as individuals on a daily basis, or even lobbying, and the importance of petitions, lobbying, and understanding and empathy when it comes to approaching difficult topics like this. So I will open it up to if Quiva and Karen, if you'd like to start, and just talking about the 400 welcomes campaign and any experiences or anything you might feel will contribute to the conversation tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Owen. I'm just so stunned by that introduction. Obviously, there's so many facts in there that many of us who've been in this kind of, or campaigning in this world for a while, we're aware of, but to hear them again in a list like that, it's just horrendous. And I'm actually struck by how many similarities there are between the statistics you're talking about within DP in Ireland, and also what we've been talking about, Quiva, with what's going on with people in Moria, in Moria, or what was Moria camp. So it's a difficult one, because I suppose where we're coming from with the 400 welcomes campaign is, and I also just want to pause for a moment and let you all know that I'm stepping in for Razan tonight, who is this incredible, if you haven't had the pleasure of meeting her before, she's a wonderful Syrian-Irish journalist who regrettably could not make it tonight. So we are hyper aware that we're lacking the, from the 400 welcomes campaign, we're lacking the migrant perspective, which we feel is very important on every panel. So apologies in advance, and we'll try our best, but everyone please chime in if you'd like to. But I suppose where we all came together as a group of women who have all been involved in various ways in Ireland and abroad, working in various refugee solidarity groups, and also working towards better treatment of refugees and migrants in Europe. And when the fire happened in Moria, Quiva Butterly and Karen Moynihan, who is also a wonderful activist, and she was the child welfare officer in Calais before the Calais jungle was dismantled, got a group of women together from different walks of life, and we were like, well, what can we actually do about this, and what can Ireland do about this when there's already such a disastrous system in place, and how can we campaign for the government to take people who are in desperate need of an immediate basic shelter, food, basic medical care. How can we do that with the knowledge that they simply cannot be put into direct provision in Ireland? That's just not an option. So what we tried to do, and what we have started to do, and we've made some progress, is frame the campaign around asking Ireland to uphold its obligation in what they agreed to do as a larger part with regards to the European migration crisis. And I'm sure you guys are aware how much they have not upheld their commitment over the years. And their initial response to the Moria fire, very quietly, was that they would take 4 people, which unfortunately was not a typo. So we decided that we would ask them to take 400 people, that these men, women and children would not be put into the direct provision system, but rather an alternative, perhaps community sponsorship program, which is one of the ideas that we've talked about, would instead be their reception in Ireland. So far we have gotten a great response from the public, which is wonderful, because especially during these times with COVID, that's not always a given anymore. And last week we had a briefing with some members of the Senate, or of the Seanad, a couple of senators who were really empathetic and seemed to really want to move forward with us in getting the government to take 400. The Minister for Justice did come out and say that they would take 50. Caoimhe, am I right? Am I getting that right? Is it 50? Mind blank there. So they would take 50. So they've gone up from 4 to 50, but we still think that we can do better. And ultimately, this throws a much bigger question on not just Ireland's attitude towards refugees and migrants, but Europe's as a whole. And I suppose the urgency in these camps is almost always caused by the lack of safe passage to get to a country like Ireland. It's virtually impossible for people in Moria to get to Ireland and seek asylum in Ireland unless they are literally plucked by the government, which is or make the impossible journey across Europe. So Caoimhe, would you like to take it from there, or will we keep talking about our actual?
Well, what we were thinking maybe, and then maybe we can loop back to some of the practical things that have sort of happened over the last weeks, Karen. But I was thinking, just because both Karen and I have been communicating with Owen, and again, thank you so much, Owen, for organising today. Throughout the course of the day, just because we were really conscious in terms of positionality and the fact, A, that we're white, and B, that we're speaking on a panel about direct provision, not having any lived experience of it, and with all of the privilege that comes with our positionality. So we're here, I think, in a context solely to try and link the context of direct provision to a context of containment, of externalization of borders, of the brutal violence that is being enacted on an EU level to maintain those borders, and to also try and perhaps give a glimpse of some of the self-organization by refugees, asylum seekers, and undocumented communities that is happening in contexts in Greece and elsewhere, that look to the strength and I think power of movements like Massey in Ireland really as a form of leadership. And it's interesting because I see Bulaleni here, and I'm conscious as we refer to the Department of Justice and, you know, the very limited sort of response that they've had vis-a-vis what we've been, you know, calling for in terms of 50. I'm also very conscious that Bulaleni, according to Twitter, hello, friend and comrade, is now living under the potentiality of a deportation threat from that same department. So we're conscious of the complete incongruity, and it's really important. And I think that this has been done so successfully over the past few years, since 2015 onwards, since 2014 onwards, when a movement sort of emerged in Ireland of response vis-a-vis the images of hundreds of thousands of people making those very long perilous journeys across the Aegean and Mediterranean Sea, that Massey was very clear from the offset that it has to be a tandem demand. So refugee solidarity and direct provision. And that has been something I think that has deepened really, you know, that sort of that evolving curve of people understanding that they are two different iterations of the same thing, and the same thing that they're iterations of is a profound injustice, a profound negation of the rights of those who are seeking asylum, and a profound negation too of the potentiality of deep community-rooted solidarity. And if anything, I'd say, you know, within this campaign that we're really trying to embody and speak to is that this solidarity has to be predicated on rights, you know, and not just empathy, not just, you know, feelings of discomfort or sadness or anger when viewing the images of the oppression of people, but also predicated on justice and liberatory, emancipatory justice as well. So within that, part of the urgency that has been sort of fueling some of what Karen has referred to in the sense of us coming together as a group of people who have worked in different contexts in these containment camps, because they're not sort of refugee camps, you know, in the sense I think of maybe, and not that I can actually think of any of a refugee camp that has anything resembling adequate infrastructure or access to rights, but they're very much containment camps, which initially were being used as a site of deportation in the same way that direct provision is modeled off of a British model of externalizing and of potential deportation, of isolating people from spheres of references, from community, from solidarity, from links that can protect people, you know, or that can respond when people are under risk and threat of deportation. deportation. So there is an intentionality, towards what has now become a profit-driven model and a rights-negating model, and one, that really diminishes, undermines, and weakens that potential for a really grassroots community response. So vis-a-vis Moria, the context which we're trying to respond to there, again, is one of containment. It's one in which EU policies, of which Ireland is completely complicit in, have externalized borders, literally at this stage into the Aegean and Mediterranean Sea. There are policies that criminalize search and rescue work. So a lot of the ships that a lot of you have probably seen and are familiar with in different sea contexts, their work has been criminalized. So NGOs like MSF, Sea-Watch, there's a multiplicity. There's 9 different search and rescue responses that have literally been funded by sort of ordinary stroke extraordinary people across Europe who are saying that they're not prepared to be complicit in what is being done in our collective name. And what is being done in our collective name has been a tacit decision on an EU level to allow people to die. And that is translating into the deaths of tens of thousands of women, men, and children, whether invisibilized deaths at sea, similar to the invisibilized deaths in the desert crossing from Mexico to the US. It's being seen in invisibilized deaths in the backs of refrigerated lorries, vis-a-vis high speed sort of trains in the passage of people trying to get from Calais to Britain, in deaths from hypothermia in the Balkan sort of routes, that many tens of thousands of people are now trying to navigate, and it also means a state of indefinite limbo. So the reason, despite the fact that neither Karen and I have lived experience in anything that resembles the injustice of direct provision, the reason that we were happy to participate tonight is to try and link a context of direct provision and all of the injustice that it entails to the context of containment camps that are happening in all of these different European contexts. And in that containment, there's multiple violation of rights that are going on, and that is from the most basic in terms of people's access to adequate shelter, to food, to sufficient medical care, to much more complex rights in terms of the right to access internationally recognized protections. And there are so many hurdles that exist in that. So Moria, probably, I'd say, having gone back and forth there since 2014 and seen it in its different stages and iterations, from pre-EU Turkey deal to post, and from when hundreds of thousands of people were transiting through the camp until now, it was a site of profound suffering. And it's not sort of something, I think, that can be, and I'm conscious of my time here, but it's not something that can be communicated, I think, in any way that can really speak to the visceral impacts of that. So Owen, you very rightly pointed to, the profound psychological, emotional, spiritual, existential impacts of direct provision. And that was seen in Moria as well, perhaps plus another edge, which was a huge lack of safety in and exterior to the camp, because it was regularly attacked in the last few months by fascists, by armed fascists. So it was a camp in which parents would line up sometimes for 6 hours holding their feverish children, trying to access medical care. It was a camp where people spent on average 7 to 8 hours per day in food queues or in queues for people's secondhand clothes. And these are people, who have, and I'm not saying, if secondhand clothes are an environmental choice, it's very different to these states of enforced dependency where you are dependent, on these minimal supports. And when you think about a population who at its height was 22,000 people in a camp, designed at best, and by designed, I mean, with a total lack of supports for 3,100 people, the conditions in the camp were really, really bleak. So in a way, that what happened in Moria, because it was symbolically burning for years, it burnt a month ago, but the policies that ignited the suffering that went on in the camp have been going on unabated since 2014. But there are so many commonalities. And in a way, the fight against direct provision here, for the abolition of direct provision, the emancipatory sorry, abolition of that system, not reformation, is mirrored in the self-organization that is going on in Greece, that is going on in Italy and the Balkans and France and so many other contexts of people who have been pushed to the utter limits of endurance, psychological, emotional, physical, of saying enough. And if anything, I think for all of you lovely students who are on this call today, I'd say in terms of involvement, aside from that initial listening and learning with humility and really looking to self-organized structures in terms of leadership, but it would be also to sit with the urgency of this situation, because it's something for so many of us who have been present in Greece, who have witnessed, children being resuscitated, who have witnessed on shores, who have witnessed tens of thousands at this stage of preventable deaths. But the situation is getting more and more urgent, particularly as we head into another winter. But so I'm going to stop now and go back to Karen. And maybe, Karen, if useful, before we go into the next speaker, maybe just talk about some of, what's been going on and maybe how folks could engage if that feels
Definitely.
congruent.
I think the way you described that, Caoimhe, it just makes it so clear that like direct provision in Ireland, designed 21 years ago as a temporary measure, Moria was designed as a temporary detainment camp. Isn't that right, Caoimhe? Detainment camp meant to temporarily hold people before they were deported. That's what Moria was designed for 3,100 people. And it became this absolute, overpopulated doesn't even cover it. So I feel like in a very similar way, I feel like the direct provision centres in Ireland are Ireland's version of Europe's refugee camps. They never worked in the first place. They weren't designed to work, and they simply can't be replaced. So right now, the UNHCR has gone in and built a new camp beside where Moria burnt, and it's completely inadequate. The tents are so close together. I mean, it's not even humane on the most normal of times, let alone COVID times. And we're getting videos every day from friends of Caoimhe in the camp, and also from Irish doctors who are working there, of the camp is already completely flooded, and people aren't even being given the basic tools so that they can fix this. There's videos of young men out trying to dig drains into the side of the camp. It's absolutely horrendous, and it's completely unbelievable that it's happening. But in the same kind of anger that I felt, and that I'm sure most people felt when they first learned about DP, I mean, how many Irish people do you know that didn't even know it was happening, didn't even know there was a centre down the road, didn't even know these things? And I'm so glad that the country has now copped on to what is going on, because this sort of secrecy, push it all to the periphery, and no one will notice. That is a tactic employed in Ireland, but also in Europe, and at the very crux of it, the same way in Moria and in Greece and in Italy, where refugees that arrive are being denied the simple choice to go where they want to go and to try and create a life for themselves. It's the same in Ireland. The people literally being denied the right to live among the people and actually contribute. So I think, as far as getting involved with our campaign, what we're trying to do is a lot of political pressure, because it's kind of all that we can, keeping the pressure on the on various senators and TDs. And at the moment we're trying to we've asked the senators that were at the briefing last week to aid us in having another cross-party briefing that will hopefully move more mountains and get them to agree to upping the numbers. It's unfortunately, it's a slow game, and with every day the urgency is greater. But we welcome any and all involvement, and I mean, it goes without saying that and we are very clear on our website, our stance on DP as well, and how that is not an option. Also within the group, we have been, I mean, I know you're going to talk about alternatives to direct provision a bit later, Owen, if that's correct. Actually, maybe we'll just come back to that if that is the next topic. But we will have some comments to add to that with regards other country systems, and also some initiatives outside of Ireland that other members have been involved in.
Great. Thank you, Karen, and Caoimhe as well. I actually just have one question, and perhaps this might be able to be addressed a little later on, but just Caoimhe, you're talking about how campaigns have to be founded on rights, and how profit-driven models do actually weaken grassroots campaigns. And especially for yourself as well, Karen, like how can people every day, bar signing petitions, how can people every day actually actively contribute to putting more political pressure on? Because just as one example, there was the mother and baby bill that was trying to be fast tracked for the Oireachtas, and I got a response from one TD saying that they had received over 2,000 emails in one day. So like the message had clearly been felt. Like, is there methods like that, or do you have methods that go above and beyond merely just emailing and signing petitions?
Would you like to answer, Caoimhe, or like?
I might just say one thing towards that, just and then you add on to it, Karen. But so we partnered with Uplift at the beginning of this process to try and initiate sort of a similar email campaign. So there was close to 20,000 emails sent, which is good. You know, it's maybe not at the level that we could aspire to, but it is great. And if students can continue that option, that would be great as well. But one idea that has been sort of floated with us is the possibility of sort of local councils signing on, and only if the conditions exist for that to be a sympathetic motion, but to pass motions, etc. But what we're conscious of at the moment is, you know, we have access, because Ireland is an extremely small country, you know, vis-a-vis sort of political power, to a lot of decision makers. And what we're feeling is like the opposition is on board, you know, and there was a minister from the Greens in the last debriefing, etc. So if we're going to sort of drive this as an opposition-led process, you know, we probably can. But Karen, you can speak to this as well. It would be great to have more students engaged with this, but I think, yay, but also just really looking at that local sort of possibility. So given the parochial sort of nature of a lot of Irish political organizing, sometimes just pursuing local representatives. And the way I think that we're thinking about this is in the immediacy of the coming months, if the numbers, you know, can be significantly raised, that's great. And that's what we'll continue to push for. In the interim, this being made an issue, when coupled with a demand to NDP, is really important, because it makes it an issue, you know, for the next time and another election sort of rolls over, or it makes it an issue, you know, that political representatives understand that it matters to their constituents. But I'd say exploring those local angles as well. And then, yeah. I
would just add to that, like on a very, very basic level, you know, informing yourself on what is going on. I'm so glad to see that I feel like this year the DP conversation has gone more mainstream, which is brilliant. And now, like, in general, I would say triple the amount of friends that I know would have more to say on DP. They would understand a bit more about it. And I feel like Ireland's obligations and Ireland's attitudes toward refugees and migrations on a European context also has to become something that is understood locally. And I know that all sounds very wordy, but what I really just mean is, like, talk to your families about it, talk to your communities about it. If you're involved in your communities, get more involved. Like when I got involved in this kind of world, I suppose about 4 years ago, the first thing a group of friends and I did from Bray, we're from Bray, and there's a pretty tight community there, and the first thing we did was try and teach ourselves and try and learn, and we organized a night in a local pub and invited people who'd from Massey down. Lucky came down actually from Massey and had a chat with everybody, and loads of locals came down and just asked lots of questions, and it was so simple. It was amazing. We got such a good reaction, and while at the time there was no DP centre in Bray at the time, but there is now, but it really sowed the seeds for the local attitude of what was acceptable and what was not acceptable. And then when the time came to call on people in our town for help with various things and to let people know what was going on, I found that the attitude, the right attitude, was there. And obviously you're always going to have issues, and unfortunately in Bray there has been a horrible kind of right-wing nasty graffiti on places, but people again have come back in response to that, and I just think that's so important, to just get, you know, you're from Tipperary, and like get your local community involved, get everybody talking about it, get everyone understanding it, because that's what it's going to take in the long run. That's what it's going to take to influence politicians. It's going to be not just the 20,000 emails from students or whoever. It's the 80-year-old who actually rings their TD. That's who I feel like is going to make the difference on this. It's going to be people who really take the next step and ready their communities to be places that can cope with dismantling DP and creating an alternative. I'm done. Sorry, that was a rant.
So Bulaleni, if we can divert just for a moment, and then maybe Karen and I, because we're just conscious that we've taken up so much time and that there's two other speakers after. But while we have this space, Bulaleni, and I know Namsa, and I don't think Ellie has joined the call yet, but.
Hi, 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4. Can you hear me?
Perfectly, sounding clear.
And then my phone falls. There are a lot of things that people can do. I think Karen has covered much of it, but our campaigning will be moving towards implementing the recommendations that were issued in June, and there'll be more being issued next week. Minister Roderick O'Gorman has said that the report by the Catherine Day Group, which was tasked to reviewing the system of direct provision and how Ireland could treat asylum seekers better. And so the report will be published next week. We expect it to have a number of recommendations in the area of accommodation, in the area of the right to work, in the area of education, basically everything that we would have been calling for will have an answer. Whether or not we like the answer is another story. But it will have wide-ranging recommendations. And then, of course, there'll be the reception and of those recommendations. Some people will like them, some people won't like them. Can't never please everybody, but our campaigning will be focused on getting politicians to implement their recommendations that we like. So we'll probably be cherry picking and seeing which works for us and which doesn't work for us, and how it could be made to work better. Minister Roderick O'Gorman will be drafting a white paper, which is due by the end of December this year, that will set out how Ireland will end the system of direct provision. There is a lot of talk about how that will work out, but as we know, Ireland has a housing crisis, quote unquote. We don't see any other alternative to direct provision without addressing public housing stock, for instance, because if you're saying that people shouldn't be living in direct provision centers, where are they going to live? Their call from Mercy has always been that people should be allowed to live in their communities like everybody else, be allowed to work and do all the things that are ordinary things that people do. So we'll be pushing for that. We'll be annoying politicians, and we'll be relying on members of the public to help us in annoying politicians and showing up when we protest. We may have to break some COVID-19 restrictions and go into protest if they take too long to make the decisions that are needed to be made, because we need to start seeing the foundation being laid for phasing out the system of direct provision. So if legislation needs to change, we need to see bills being introduced. We need to see policies being tabled, that kind of thing. That will mean calling your TD. That will mean knocking on your TD's door. That will mean in their offices. That will mean writing them an email. We had an email campaign that similar to the one that Quiver mentioned, that was sent by thousands of people. Irish people sent emails to their TDs, various ministers that we had targeted, and their local TDs. And the response, I would say, was been much positive, because we saw quite a number of commitments in the program for government that spoke to some of the issues we had raised, like regularization for undocumented people. The minister, the government committed that they will have a scheme to regularize undocumented people. They also committed to ending direct provision. And so we will require a lot of people to get behind us when we call for people to do so. So the solution is to simply turn up, listen, and speak.
Thank you, Bulaleni. We have one comment as well from Bernie into the chat, just saying that the Bray Refugee Solidarity Group is a local group supporting asylum seekers. I support asylum seekers through Bridging the Gap. I try to get what asylum seekers need and answer questions with the help of Massey as well. It's a fantastic input as well. Thank you, Bernie. Bridging the gap, would I be correct in saying that bridging the gap is the running, it's running with those in direct provision? So I'll just ask you to unmute yourself.
Sorry, your question again?
Bridging the Gap, is that the organization that's set up, is it running with members of direct provision, or is Bridging the Gap a different?
It's just me by myself, literally. I contact asylum seekers in as many asylum centres as I can, in as many direct provision centres, and they ask me for whatever they need, and I try and supply as fast as I can. I reach out to communities everywhere, and I get, be it items or advice, I try and get it as fast as I can. It's literally called Bridging the Gap because I step in where our government has failed the asylum seekers. It's a thing that I shouldn't be doing. But unfortunately, the government hasn't stepped up to help.
That's fantastic. Thank you for speaking as well. That's fantastic.
No problem.
I'm just conscious that, Conal, sorry, you've been on the back end now for the past 40 minutes. I'm sure you're very eager to get in with a lot of fantastic input into the conversation. So please, if you will.
Oh, to be honest, Owen, I mean, I've been so fascinated listening to everyone spoken so far. I'm perfectly happy to wait my turn. I agree with so much of what was said. And yeah, it's so great to hear such passion, such enthusiasm, and the wealth of experience and knowledge that everyone who's spoken so far has is just amazing. And particularly something that Caoimhe alluded to there kind of resonated with me, where particularly with regards to the migrant crisis and direct provision, as she said, there's a very fine line between speaking on behalf of people and speaking in support of people. So to echo what she said, with Trinity VDP, we're absolutely trying to speak in support of people, because while again, as Caoimhe said, we're very fortunate to have a very privileged perspective on it. Obviously, we still don't want to sit around and just let this happen. And as Bulani mentioned as well, the support from the public, the support from the community, that's what we want to try and foster in VDP, in Trinity, and try and raise awareness for it in any way that we can. So I suppose just to give a bit of background on VDP involvement in general. So VDP social justice up until this year, it was a very small team, and we could only focus on one thing, like one particular topic per year. And it was 2 years ago that our team was focused on direct provision and the migrant crisis. And that was I would have been in second year at the time. That was my discovery of the whole issue. And we held a number of solidarity campaigns for migrants on campus. And we actually organised, it sounds like the night that Karen was talking about in Bray, we had a gig called Seekers, where we did a similar thing, where we it was sort of a celebration of the diversity of culture and inviting people from direct provision to collaborate with other Irish artists, and it was a great night. So this year now with social justice, we've actually expanded, and we're hoping to be able to focus on a number of topics, and absolutely direct provision is something that and I mean, it's not restricted to just one particular place or one particular community. It's something that anybody who reads about it, and anyone who speaks to people who've experienced it and who's paying attention to it at all, you can't not feel outraged by it, and you can't not want to do something about it. I feel like I'm just repeating what people have said so far, but it's absolutely true. There's a number of facets where I feel like everybody has an obligation and a responsibility to do their part. Again, to allude to what was said previously about representation and making sure that we're not speaking on behalf of people. Obviously, it's so great that people in direct provision are speaking out, and that Massey and groups like Massey are emerging, and that they have done such great work. And it's also great, as Karen said, from our perspective, for example, that there are more people who are from these privileged positions who are kind of tuning into it now, where they really should have been all along, to be honest. But now there's more, as Karen said, there's more of like a general knowledge of it, and it's becoming more known, and the stories of people who've gone through these terrible experiences are being heard and being shared and being supported in more ways. Although I was reading, there's an article from the Irish Independent this week that still 3/4 of people in Ireland have never spoken to someone in direct provision. And there was a similar statistic, it was maybe half people, or 40% of people in Ireland wouldn't know what it is even. So there's still a lot of work to be done, but that's where we really want to try in VDP to be sort of spreading that message and trying to make it even more widely known as it is now, because I suppose looking at it from in the context that we were talking about of what are the steps that have to be taken to end it. And I know that Bulelani mentioned it there. There's sort of different streams of that, from what I can gather anyway. There's, the policy level and the governmental level. There's the institutional level, and then there's the community level. So I suppose the policy level and the governmental level is the most difficult one to affect, because ultimately it all comes down to politicians being held accountable, which, as we've seen in the history of direct provision, that has not been the case in any way. It's been so slow to change. It's been, it says something that we've made more progress probably in the last, 5 years or so than in the previous 15, and still it's not at all, it's still not at the end goal, nowhere near it. So that says something about the government's ability and willingness to act on it in a timely fashion, despite the number of reports and stuff that have come out and the number of recommendations. So that's quite hard to affect. But as Bulelani mentioned, getting onto TDs, putting pressure on people, that is the best way for people to try and do that. And yes, it's frustrating at times, because, as I mentioned before, you look at, as I said, anybody who reads into it, the problem is that people aren't reading into it, but anybody who reads into it, you can't help but feel so frustrated and so baffled that this is allowed to go on. The number of studies, the number of reports, the number of recommendations that were brought up, and just stuff that it's almost hard to pick an example of it. Stuff that's so blatantly violating of any human decency, and it is going on, here under our noses, and most people don't know about it. Just awful. So that's one thing, is the policy level. And I suppose because it's so complicated, as I said, it is quite hard to impact that. But there are ways. Get onto your TDs. Even in Trinity, we're lucky enough to sort of have that platform to try and connect with, say, the Senate and stuff like that, and to have great weeks like this that the SU is organising, to try and have a platform to add our voices to support those who are trying to end direct provision. And that sort of ties in as well with what I said about the institutional level. That's another injustice that's going on, where in Trinity, for example, and actually universities across Ireland, I know that we were talking about the ASAP scholarship program earlier in the week. And I mean, if there's evidence that there's institutional attitude changes needed to try and support asylum seekers in Ireland, that is a desperate cry for that. You look at, I think it was 2016, it was brought in, I believe, or 2015, that there's this asylum seekers grant. So an aspiring student who was an asylum seeker could avail of this grant to access third level education. But the restrictions to that, you have to have spent 5 years in the Irish school system and have done the Leaving Cert, which, I mean, if that's not a joke, that number one, you'll have been an asylum seeker for 5 years, and the fact that that is just openly acknowledged that is a requirement is absurd. Having a Leaving Cert education as well, completely disregarding the skills of people who are coming from abroad, who are fully qualified, have fully, it shows the ignorance of what the government and what policymakers, their perception of people who are seeking asylum in Ireland. And then, as I said before about how slow it is to change, or maybe the lack of willingness to change, it's very incriminating then, kind of backpedaling on that, where you saw 2 years after that, they reduced the restrictions then to have it so that it was down from 5 years to 3 years, because that's a very generous, middle ground to make on that, I suppose. And now, just this year, it was finally changed to a relatively more reasonable restriction, that you don't have to have had any schooling in Ireland or a Leaving Cert You just need to have been resident in Ireland for 3 years, which the fact that that is relatively good is, you know, the government openly acknowledging that to access this grant, you have to have been an asylum seeker for 3 years, where their asylum seeking process was set up to last no longer than 6 months. Or sorry, the system of direct provision. Like that's, if there's the fact that that isn't they're openly acknowledging that is just ridiculous. But anyway, you have that going on, and tied into that is like the idea of the University of Sanction, and the places of sanction, which unfortunately are, there's been some progress made on it recently, but it's still few and far between. And to use the context of Trinity, there's 2 colleges in Dublin that don't have that University of Sanctuary status of the universities in Dublin, and Trinity is one of them, and so is RCSI, which, speaking from a Trinity perspective, is just utterly embarrassing and shocking. And even then, you know, there's no cohesion there. There's no sense of institutional attitude changes to try and be more accommodating of this. Like Trinity offers 4 of those scholarships, like 4, and there's 7,500 asylum seekers in Ireland currently, and they're offering 4 of those people a chance to study in Trinity. Like, and the maximum is 30, which is relatively good, but like the bar is set so low. That's what I mean when I say that an institutional change has happened, because that's not, you know, Trinity can decide that tomorrow to upgrade it if they want to. They can decide to take 50, but they just won't. And there's no policy, there's no government, you know, prohibition there. That's just institutions in Ireland that are still not at all accepting or up to scratch in terms of treating asylum seekers with proper respect. And that's something that hopefully throughout the course of this year and future years we can try and support asylum seekers and the asylum seeking community in trying to force that change from Trinity and to do something about that. But that's what I mean when I say that there's institutional attitude changes that severely need to happen. Even the wording of it, if you look it up, it's like, you know, it gives the funding, it gives a bursary, and then also it gives a laptop in brackets, you know, if practicable and applicable, and it offers you public transport in brackets within a reasonable commuting distance of the college. Like there's no, it's so cold. There's no welcoming sense. It's like, oh, let's tick the box and let's, you know, oh, we have to have this thing there. Like, let's just put that in. There's no actual welcoming. There's no, you know, there's no understanding. There's no compassion. And even as the recipient of the ACP scholarship who was speaking on Wednesday told us, commuting 2 hours from Monaghan to Dublin every day, like it's just absurd. And the fact that people have to go through that just, you know, should rightly infuriate everybody, but just not enough people know about it. And to quickly touch on the third facet that I mentioned of community, that's maybe where a lot of people should be looking to help the most, because ultimately, you know, look at Bernie, who is amazing in that dedication that she has to trying to better her community in that sense. Like, that's the power of the community aspect of it, is that you don't have to have huge backing. Okay, well, I know that there's a lot of time constraints and, you know, you would need funding, but relatively to trying to get the government to implement a policy, you know, the community is much more tangible. You can do much more stuff there. You have much more scope for change in the small term, or sorry, in like the smaller scope. And the shocking thing is that isn't promoted more by institutions, by the government, because when it comes to looking for alternatives, I know Bulalani, as you rightly mentioned, it's very complicated. You know, where are these people going to live? We can't support them currently with our housing crisis. But you know, that will have to come from the community, and it's so interesting to read about it. I highly recommend looking up about it's called community sponsorship, as like a scheme that exists out there. Canada, that has been one of their main models for immigration, and they've successfully resettled nearly 300,000 immigrants since the 80s up to now. So it's an amazing model. It basically, a community, any community can sign up to it, or well, sign up, I suppose, just decide to do it. They fundraise some money, and they commit to taking in a family into their community, and they sort out, you know, language classes if they're needed, and get them settled into school, and provide them with enough funds the way they can, you know, keep themselves afloat before they find a job and get acclimated, and give them proper access to transport if they need it, because as is well known with direct provision, and there's huge restrictions placed on what asylum seekers can actually afford in terms of independent living when it comes to transport and providing for yourself. So the community tries to assist with that. And oh, that's great to hear, Niamh, that this community sponsorship gone on. I mean, you're probably much better to speak about it than me, but I just found it so fascinating that it is exactly the right approach that should be taken with accommodating people seeking asylum, and yet not many people really know about it. And the government, while they have come out in support of it, it'll be interesting now to see in the Catherine Day report if there is models like that suggested, because ultimately that seems to be what people have to do. Speaking of the housing crisis, I've worked part-time in homeless services now for about 1.5 years, and you see there as well that there is just it really is a crisis. It's actually eerily similar to the stories you hear about direct provision, where you have people who are in this system that's meant to be very short-term, meant to be supporting people, and they've been just in there for 3-4 years, and there's nowhere for them to go. And yet it's, you hate to get into the whole at the governmental level, the how disheartening it is, but you look at their inability to implement a rent cap, or are there different interests there with the for-profit models of direct provision, and the number of landlords who are in government. There's all these problems that immediately when you're trying to address something like direct provision or something like homelessness, it all just piles in that. So that's why I feel like it's very helpful to scale it back, go back to community, and change some attitudes there, because unfortunately, social media and the internet has sort of amplified the worse, the less tolerant people in communities around Ireland. But I feel like that is something that should hugely be pushed. I know that a lot of NGOs involved in the asylum seeking process have been pushing it, but it's something that needs to come out in government support, and one of many things that needs to come out with government support. But yeah, I think that it is quite encouraging that, despite it being so broad and despite it being such a difficult thing to tackle, there are still ways that we can help. And I'll finish up with this actually, because it just came to me that I wanted to mention this. One of the ways to do that, it doesn't have to be as big and scary as like, oh, well, can we try and make this exact policy enacted in government? It can be something like, it sounds maybe strange because it does sound like a bigger issue, but something like indirectly affecting it. Something like the 27th Amendment. That's something that is, I feel like, is in the process of starting to gain the same steam that hopefully the Repeal the Eighth movement was able to successfully achieve. And that would be a huge thing that is impacting asylum seekers, and wouldn't necessarily end direct provision, but would be huge for awareness raising, huge for kind of getting people clued into that, obviously hugely empowering for many asylum seekers as well. So, there are ways like that where there's so many ways to try and offer your support. And to tie it all back to what I said at the very start, and what Karen and Caoimhe already said, unfortunately, being someone from such a privileged position, I can never empathize with asylum seekers. I can only try and sympathize. And I think that there's so much room. I think anybody who hears about it, or most people who hear about it, will have that same reaction and will want to try and help. So it is just about getting the message out there and trying as much as possible to have it be that, as Karen said, direct provision is just, it's known as a thing, and it's known as a thing that is bad and needs to change. And that's basically social justice in a nutshell, and social change. If enough people, like if everyone was up in arms about direct provision tomorrow, it would end. Like it would end just tomorrow if it was like, if everyone was against it. So it's just about trying to get that majority, trying to get enough people to care about it and inform people on it to where it can't be ignored anymore, because it has been ignored for so long. So yeah, I fully agree with what was said so far. And yeah, I think that it's a long way to go, but thankfully there's some stuff in the making currently. So we'll have to just see.
Thank you, Conal. And actually, as Leanne pointed out in the chat, and I was actually going to bring it up as well, around the loosening of certain restrictions to the 5 down to 3 years, the ASA recipient last Wednesday actually did mention as well that they were stripped of the scholarship this year because they'd only spent 2 years in Ireland rather than 3 years. So the access to education, the waiving of tuition fees, the stipend, the food from the buttery, the laptop, all those different amenities that were provided for the students to allow them access to education have actually been postponed for the next year because of, again, these ridiculous restrictions which have been placed on them. If I actually do have one question for for everyone. It was noted by Roderick O'Gorman at the Trinity Vdp talk on dismantling direct provision that with the coalition government, the first document that was drafted, there was actually no mention of direct provision. And I'm kind of wondering from everyone here, really, how confident would you have been if the Green Party weren't there and if there was no kind of, I suppose, watchdog to ensure that direct provision was put onto the coalition government's agenda? How confident are you that people would have spotted this and that it would have actually been re-put back on or reinstated, or would have just gotten through without anyone between Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael?
I think from the start, we know that direct provision was created by a Fianna Fáil government, and Fine Gael came in and loved it. They have had no interest in actually ending direct provision. All they were doing was making minor tweaks to direct provision centres. So when we were complaining that people are stripped of their personal autonomy, they introduced what they call independent living centers. That's basically just putting pots and stoves in a direct provision center, and maybe a food hall where people can go and queue and get food with direct provision currency code, what they call points. Or vouchers. It depends on the type of centers. Even in the centers, there's disparities. It's not the same. So you might go to a direct provision center that has a shop in Athlone Direct Provision Center, for instance, where people have to go to the food hall and get food with their points, whereas you might go to a different independent living center in Limerick City, where people have a Revolut card and they can go to any shop in Limerick City and buy food wherever they want to buy food, like everybody else who goes out and does groceries. And so there are massive disparities in how the system operates, because it's also the centers themselves are run by different operators, and so each one does their own thing differently. The standards that they were introduced, they drafted, will only be implemented from January next year. And even those standards aren't perfect, but they speak of them as if they are the best thing they've ever done. 20 years later on, they want to have standards for direct provision centers. And so I think there was no faith much that the two parties who had led governments in Ireland for almost a century would have ended the system of direct provision. There wasn't much interest from them. Their responses to people campaigning against direct provision have always been like, there is no alternative. They're always dismissive. Even after the Minister David Stanton, who used to have responsibility for justice and equality in the Department of Justice with child welfare, he made a statement that actually direct provision is better for people. You know, they get a roof over their heads, they get food, and they get laundry, they get electricity. And you had the Taoiseach, the former Taoiseach, rather, Leo Varadkar, listing things that we give them pocket money. So there wasn't interest at all in ending the system of direct provision. We hope that the government lasts long enough for them to actually end direct provision, but crossing fingers.
Big fear for all of us, I feel. Very, very shaky government at the moment. But if anybody would like to, no worries, Karen. Thank you so much for your contributions tonight as well. I really, really do appreciate it. I am aware now we're on 6 minutes over time. So if anybody else would actually like to ask any questions, or if anybody would like to contribute any more or anything else to the conversation, please feel free to.
Sorry, I just have like one quick thing that I really think that should be mentioned moving forward after this. Also, that it wasn't mentioned the whole way through this, is the act of systemic racism. I do think there is a difference, not even a difference, but like how homelessness is predominantly experienced by Irish people in this country, while as direct provision is for people who are seeking asylum in this country, and it is a form of systemic racism, and that in itself is why it wasn't mentioned in the aforementioned brief that you were mentioning that happened during the week, that it doesn't affect those people who are in power, so it is not something that is on their radar. I think moving forward, like what was said about like speaking to people, you know, like what was happening in Bray, speaking to people in the bar, I think is really great. I've like been in UCD listening to Bellini speak about how to move forward and act now, but I do think that at this time, especially with everything that has happened globally, that should also be a topic moving forward and is a contender. That's really just what I want to say. I think this should move forward, and that should be something. It's very intersectional. It's not as I think the conflation of it with homelessness is something that they're intersectional, but they're also two separated things that are happening in the country. So yeah, that's my viewpoint. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, it's interesting to mention that, Leanne, because I suppose the unfortunate similarity between them, you said there's a small intersection. That intersection is, well, obviously there's, you know, the issue of housing in general, but also the government's inability to actually solve either of them or even come close to it. And it is disheartening that, you know, you're mentioning, okay, well, almost relatively, it's like homelessness is an issue that's paid more attention to, and yet that still is not at all where, you know, the approach to that is not being tackled the way it should be. So again, that's to do with raising awareness. You know, the reason that people, as you rightly said, Leanne, the reason that people are more aware and in tune of homelessness is because they're more likely to know more people who are, you know, who have been involved in homelessness, who may have been homeless themselves, because it is an issue that is predominantly experienced by Irish people. So it's about trying to raise the awareness to where, you know, direct provision is given equal platform and give, like, people care equally about direct provision as homelessness, because you know, obviously it's not at all at the same level of awareness. So it's impossible to try and make the same gain on that when people aren't aware that it's even a thing. So I fully agree with you. There's a small intersection about, like, you know, housing and government policy, but like in terms of the systemic racism, yeah, absolutely, like that's part of the problem. People know more about homelessness because it affects people who are of their same ethnicity. So that is a problem that has to be tackled with raising awareness, you know.
And I'd say also, maybe just to draw it into that international context that Leanne spoke eloquently about as well, the very like roots of this entire movement are very much rooted in the anti-racist and anti-fascist movement across Europe, you know, and that would be a movement that would most definitely take its leadership, you know, from Black Lives Matter, and numerous other iterations of Black Lives Matter, sort of pre and post and during as well. But it is something, and I'm conscious now because it's just sort of flipping back to some of the lines of inquiry that we've gone down, but in a way, and maybe that's, and Karen was speaking about this before we started tonight, sometimes we're so used to speaking to each other, like about these issues, you know, and the struggle, that we don't always like remember to sort of draw out, the key points. But I would just say that most definitely anti-racism is implicit in all of these forms of solidarity that we've alluded to. And I'd say also like quite a decolonized, you know, sort of understanding of what solidarity and allyship, or like co-participation in struggles for social justice, can and should entail. And it's been really positive to see over the last few months, like since I think the reemergence of Black Lives Matter, you know, on a more global scale, and the way that it's been taken up, you know, in so many really localized, individualized and collective contexts throughout Europe. And I think the confidence that it's given so many young folks BIPOC folks in Ireland to speak to their experiences of racism is something that certainly as allies we learn from continually and definitely take our leadership from. So I'm really conscious of an age demographic here because I'm in my early 40s and I feel like I'm speaking, to so many of you who I know have been doing amazing student organizing, and that, I just like to say I bow my head and chapeau to that, because I think what you guys have achieved collectively, like as students and as young folks over the past few years vis-a-vis like major issues, not just the referendums, but Black Lives Matter definitely, and climate activism, and certainly has a lot to teach my generation of organizers in terms of really effective organizing. But yeah.
Thank you, Kuva. We have Owodunni has her hand up, so I'll just ask to unmute.
I was just going to comment on the fact that sometimes there's this misconception that a beggar has no choice, and so when people in direct provision start advocating for rights or advocating for how government should treat them, we kind of get this backlash that there's homelessness, there's joblessness, there's this, there's that, there's nothing like either or. There's no way that you can say the reprovision system or people in the asylum system are responsible for homelessness. It is not the fault of asylum seekers. I've been here for 6 years. I've been in the system for over 6 years. I have not worked for one day, not because I'm handicapped, not because I'm disabled, but because government policy says no. And so if there's homelessness, it is not the fault of an homeless person. It's the fault of the government. It's government's policy. So we should deviate from saying this issue is as a result of that. No, if there's willingness on the part of government, they can sort whatever issues that is wrong in the economy. They can put more beds in the hospitals. They can give student nurses pay. They can do whatever it is they like. It's just it has to do with their willingness to change things.
Thank you. Thank you so much for speaking. I'm just conscious now of time. If anyone else would like to ask any more questions or contribute to the conversation, please do feel free to. No, perfect. Okay, guys, thank you so much to everyone who's here, to Conal, to Caoimhe, and to Karen, who has left this evening, and to Bullalani as well for contributing, and to Owodunni as well for contributing as well, and Leanne as well. Really do appreciate all those contributions, for the speakers who agreed to speak tonight, and for those who've showed up and contributed to the conversation, and to given personal experiences, and to just giving real insightful experiences, and just to Bernie as well for telling us about the Bridging the Gap. Is a fantastic initiative. So thus ends this campaign week, Refugee Week, which we've been focusing on direct provision, which we've been focusing on direct provision for the week. So obviously the campaign week has ended, but the actions people can take forward and the experiences people have heard and the stories we've all heard as well, they don't end tonight. They can go on with us over the next year, the next 5 years, and through this coalition government however long they actually stay together. But it still doesn't matter. The successive governments after them will still have the direct provision agenda on their sites until it is abolished and until a more humane facility is put in place, and where more rights are given to asylum seekers and to refugees who come into our country. So on that note, if nobody else has any more questions or contributions, then I will be happy to finish the recording, and then we can all have a lovely weekend, and we can all remember the things we've learned tonight as well, and go forward knowing that there are actions that we can all take out today. So thank you so much.